what we're failing to recognize is when that emotion comes up of disgust, it's actually something we're carrying in the body. It needs, in a trauma-informed way, it needs to be touched. It needs help because you can't think your way out of it. And what comes from a celibate male hierarchy is a whole lot of it came through the mental rational age. I'm interested in bringing in embodiment to touch this mystical strain that came through that monastic tradition.
Well, welcome to the Liminal Living podcast. I am Dr. Tom Rundell, the curator of conversations around here, and I am pleased to welcome you to season 3. Yes, it's a new year. We have a new season. I'm currently recording it in December, just to be honest with you. This will release in the new year as episode 1 of the new season 3. And I'm excited to bring you a wonderful conversation with Alana Levandoski. She is an artist, first and foremost. And the form that her art takes is in music and drama and song and dance and costume, and it is a whole art form. She submerses herself into the next project and then comes out with something just very beautiful. We talked today about her homeland, her pilgrimage to Scotland, and just that inner longing that we all have as the core of our spiritual practice. That's what spirituality is. It's the practice of the longing and the desire of your inner being. And what you do with that longing is your spirituality, to quote Ronald Rolheiser, which we talk about him a little bit in this podcast. And we talk about Thomas Merton and her music and her art and society and culture and politics and Buddhism and Christianity, and we go to many, many places, and I have some revelations there real time where just some things clicked in my mind, and so it was a good conversation. And so I'm going to set you loose here on my conversation with Alana Levandoski. Well, Alana Levandoski, welcome to the Liminal Living podcast. It's so wonderful to have you here on the show today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Now, you recently went on pilgrimage to the West Highlands of Scotland to visit the roots of your family and your grandfather's homelands. Why did you go there, and what did you find?
So, last fall, not this past fall, but the fall before, I was invited to lead a retreat in Gdansk, Poland, actually. Where my Levandoski roots come from, my father's side. Mm-hmm. And I ended up deciding to bring my family. And so we had, at the time, a 6 and 8-year-old with us, who are now 7 and turned 10. And we started there. We started in Poland, and we went to my great-grandfather's lands. And didn't make it to my great-grandmother's lands because of time constraints. And then from there, I had scheduled a 10-concert tour throughout Britain, because that's the rest of my family history, is the West Highlands and the West Country of England. And so we took our children to as many of the lands as we could, to have them stand where their great-great-grandparents had lived and breathed and grew up and had their customs and traditions there, and the connection to the land, because we wanted to make the connection for ourselves. But I also had been back, especially to the West Highlands of Scotland myself, but I wanted my children to be formed from an early age, if they could, to have the story of the big water, and to not over-identify with these places, but to experience the feeling of the land remembering them, because it's very palpable, and to also carry a unique story, which is that it's like actually not that unique, which is that we really don't come from anywhere anymore, meaning we're not from here. We can practice being of here in Canada, in these lands of the Anishinaabe, and up over not too far from here, the Cree and Dene people. But we are not from here, meaning we, as treaty people who are of the treaty, we are guests in this land, and we've acted as though that's not the case. And I wanted to give my children a sense of their own story, which is displacement, and which is being sorted, at Ellis Island, up the St. Lawrence, and sort of you go here, you go there, and how organized it was, and the story of the big water, actually, which most people kind of just stopped telling. The languages were lost. I should be able to speak Kashubian, which is the West Slavic people up in northern Poland by the Baltic Sea, which is my family. I should be able to speak Scottish Gaelic, and so and carry some customs, but I don't. And so I wanted them to become aware that of this story, so that they have a fortitude to walk the walk, as we're here in these lands. And how do we walk in humility and with a sense of our own history? So
yeah. And you sparked a thought. I wonder if, like, this colonization project that the European white race has been doing for a long time, we're very aware of how that has robbed people of their land, the indigenous peoples who inhabited these lands. And we seem to be very aware of that end of the narrative. And what I hear you saying is that, like, the other side of the coin of colonization is that the colonizers have lost their land and their roots and their people and connection.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and it's a delicate thing to talk about, because it's not just, well, it happened to me, so it should happen to you.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. But part of my work is to dabble in the history of the roots of things. And the more you do that, the more you comprehend how organic and nuanced everything is, and not so cut and dried and ready to be just severed and exiled. And there is a time and a place to call things out. But I find, because I'm an artist, artists, when you just are blunt and you have no nuance to anything, things get stony really quickly. So I've developed a sense of compassion for all of these histories. And, when you stand on a beach and there were monks standing there, standing on the white strand of the monks and on the Isle of Iona, and a Viking ship is coming toward you, and you can imagine what it was like. And there's 63 monks standing there, and within 1 minute, they're gone. They're laying there on the beach, right? They had no idea what was coming at them, right? Mm-hmm. This feeling of actually standing there and experiencing in your imagination what it would have been like to have that coming at you, mm-hmm. And then looking at the complexity of these stories of who the people were in the ships and so on and so forth. And because I traveled so much before in as an like a roots artist, I was signed to Rounder Records. I was touring 19 countries like multiple times. You get this sense, you're up in Spain and you meet the Basque people, and they were forced onto Columbus's ships. They have a language that can't be traced by any Germanic influence, or it's an indigenous language. It's the more you spend time in these places, the more you start to comprehend the colonization story that goes all the way back to, you can look back at the Russian steppes, you can look through the Ural Mountains, you can look into India, even the hymn writers of like the Rishi, some of the Rishi hymn writers come from a raiding stock, but within all of that complexity, I'm interested in the artists and the bards and the hymn writers and the people who are intuiting a different God or different gods, ones that weren't as punitive, ones that weren't requiring blood, like ones that were intuiting, I think, Eros love, longing to be made manifest in this world consciously, which is what in my tradition, I would call the incarnation. And you can see it all along through. And so I have a historian's eye, but I like to be there on the ground if I can. And then I like to work it through with art, like with songwriting. I like to put it through an alchemical process that has stages to it, that doesn't bypass the hard parts and doesn't bypass my complicity, but also doesn't stick me somewhere because I think the most like subversive act we can ever act is to live a sensual life.
Because that would then be an embodiment in time and space of the essence of who we are, which is incarnation, which is the heart of the Christian faith, if you really delve into what that's all about. And you are finding... Yes,
and I think there were intuitions for that throughout.
Yes, you're finding it in the bards and the artists of all of these things.
Definitely. And of course, the animism that you find in pagan Europe. Right. And
yeah, it seems as though every people has an indigenous start from somewhere. And
of course,
I talked with, it was a while back. It was an author, Rohadi Nagasar. And one thing that he said on this podcast was find your people, and he's coming at it from an ambiguous race of a person, because he doesn't look white, he doesn't look Asian, he doesn't look like, and because he's got these mixed places, and he says, I just don't fit in so many places. And so he's communicating from that place. And when he says, find your people, to me, that's kind of put me on this little path to say, where am I from? Who are my people? Yes. And I still haven't answered that question, but it sounds like you're on a similar path right now.
This folk opera that I've been working on for 2 years, it's called Cianalis Tasknada. Cianalis is the Scottish Gaelic word for homesick.
Oh, okay.
And Tasknada is the Kashubian word for homesick. And I begin this work that it's 13 songs to reclaim the number 13, because there's 13 lunar cycles, which is very connected to female power. And that's why it was so demonized.
I did not know that.
Yes. So I mean, that's a whole other story. But the beginning of uh, this work, this opus or whatever it is, I begin it in like almost ineffable longing, and I want to touch that longing that I feel is driving. Well, Belden Lane calls it a misplaced yearning. We are misaligned with the Eros longing that longs to be made manifest consciously here. Wherever you see this chaos or friction or greed, or it's like a misalignment or a inversion or a something but still driven by this energy that wants to be made manifest here. And so I wanted to touch on this like extraordinary longing that we have, like, and some of us dissociate from it, but if we really or run from it, but if we really spend some time inside, you can feel like you can just feel it. And yeah, and I think part of the work of being someone who is no longer from a place, but can learn to be of the place they live, is the gift that comes through. Well, look at, for instance, the history of the prophets in particular, in Babylonian exile. Okay, so the first chapter of Genesis, and it was good part, actually was amended or innovated in Babylonian exile. Whereas prior to that, the story of creation, Yahweh has to kill the beast Leviathan in order for creation to come into fruition. In other words, this requirement for sacrifice, this requirement to, in order to have this, you have to do this, right? To have that. And Ezekiel saying, I will remove from them their hearts of stone and give to them a heart of flesh, and recognizing the compression that they were under that could actually bring into fruition the temple of the heart. And at around the exact same time, really almost at contemporary levels, the Buddha is having his download.
Yeah.
Okay, so you think about this, something extraordinary was happening there. And as time goes on, we harden, we hold on, we cling to certain things that are asking again to be transformed. So I'm interested in, what does it look like how can we embrace this longing, even if we can't pinpoint the home,
Yeah. Yeah, that the concept of pilgrimage has been like a spiritual quest, a spiritual journey. And we don't go on pilgrimage much anymore. It's more of like the serious people that are really into their spirituality get to go on pilgrimage, and then the rest of us have to go to work and do the things. And I think there is a way to go on pilgrimage in the place where you like stand, in to know the history of your land, who was there before you, and even like the rhythms of creation around you. I grew up in Detroit, right on 8 Mile, where I could reach out and touch the neighbor's truck from my window as it's pulling in his driveway. It was that close. And then my wife and my wife and my 2 kids, we all moved out to the country, and we have like an acre. It's surrounded by corn, and we've been there for about 15, 16 years now. And I just know like the rhythm of the land that is there. And I know where the sun sets on the horizon, at what point in time. I know what the leaves sound like when they're starting to, just before they turn color, they shift in, how they rub up against one another. You just know when the crickets start and what birds are there and when they're singing and when they're silent. And you just start to get the rhythm of the place you're in. And it feels like a pilgrimage, standing in one spot, but like through time itself, where you can learn about the place you're in by going on pilgrimage through time into the history.
Beautiful. Yes, it's the pilgrimage of the moment.
Yeah.
And I think if possible, I think it's beautiful to be able to do sacred travel that goes beyond the, constructs of what we think of as tourism.
Yes.
But also to be a pilgrim of the moment is what I feel you're saying, is like to be present with each passing moment that's where something extraordinary is happening all around you. That's definitely also something we try to pass on to our children on this land here, and to find a sense of humility inside of because any kind of possession of this is really, it's not real. It's a construct, and when you are immersed in the moment of, say, we have this windrow of trees that were left there. They're wild, like cottonwoods and poplar, and they're left there along the field for a reason. And a lot of the windrows were like the shelter belts were taken down this year all along the highway close to where we are on the prairies. We live up tucked up, like our view is of an escarpment on the prairies that's a national park. And so when we're driving along, it's like it hurts to feel all of those shelter belts gone. And so we took our kids out to this shelter belt here, not that it's ours, but that the shelter belt, and we, without being very careful not to pass on a smugness, but we went and told the trees that they were safe. We're really careful about that, though, because I've been undergoing a transformation or a humbling over the last 2 or 3 years as someone who's gone through deconstruction, if that's what we call it, because I have operated in a way that has a smugness to it and a cynicism to it. And I have truly felt in moments where I saw mutations arise, very odd, strange things to see, almost like something coming out of the cracks out of the ground, such as January 6th in your country. And I, for the first time, really asked myself, what role did I play in this mutation? And so I'm very careful if I'm going to go out and recognize the land and be one who walks consciously on the land, not to compare myself to someone who doesn't. It almost erases my act in a sense. And I'm really aware of that kind of energy now. And I'm still working through it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still working through that in a pretty significant way. And that's also what brings me back to what I've done with this folk opera is I've basically put myself through an alchemical process that has not been fun at times, in order to see that this history of the term eye for an eye, it's Babylonian in its history. It doesn't have its roots just in the what we call the Old Testament. It has deep roots that potentially goes all the way back to like ancient Mesopotamia. It's found on this stone, this Babylonian stone that has like a rule of law, and so it's an ancient idea, and my sense is that as we go through these cycles over and over and over and over again, when we don't alchemize our histories, they will mutate no matter who we are. They will mutate no matter who we are. I'm just really I'm just beginning to see all the way down what that entails. And then you start to ask yourself, well, how complex is this? Very complex, right? And it's very complex up here in the head, especially. But where do we carry what needs to be alchemized and shaken and like transformed, and that take that energy and turn it into something, because it'll go somewhere. It doesn't go nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
When we exile something, it will mutate out in the shadows somewhere. And what it does, we're partly responsible for it if we've exiled it and haven't danced and danced until it has broken up and shifted into something else. And so this work that I'm doing, I'm seeing it like by the millions of us. We are leaving, right? We're leaving the church. We are embarrassed and ashamed of our Western civilization heritage that a lot of us carry. So it becomes the elephant. And it's not even just the elephant in the room, it's literally on our backs. And we carry it around because we don't want to touch it. That's kind of the work that I'm kind of interested in exploring as I approach releasing this. It's an album, but it's also a modality that all of my projects over the last 10 years at least have been a modality. The last 10 years were really this message that really Thomas Merton really rang clear to me, is there is a place in you that belongs entirely to God or source, and that nobody can do anything to. Mm-hmm. And that I see as what Ezekiel intuited as the temple of the heart, and the palace of nowhere. Call it what you want to call it. But so I've done that work. I feel like I've put a lot of my energy toward that. And now I'm seeing this untransformed energy that is in millions of people who are trying to say, well, Jesus wasn't, this, or, he wasn't a nationalist. He wasn't a, whatever you want to say. And I agree completely with that. But I'm also interested in his almost shamanic tendencies to have a broader eye, the way his perception was to make the two become one, like just constantly constantly. And so, yeah, I am still interested in Jesus as a political subversive figure under the Roman occupation, but I'm also interested in his consciousness as he was in like in that reality. Because I got mean. I got really cynical and I got really mean. And because I was embarrassed. I think that was probably part of it, is that this is where I come from. Like this, like kind of weird caricature expression that we're seeing is like a part of my own story and history. And there's like a shame body there, I think.
Yeah.
And so it's like, if I can find a way to like separate myself from it and kind of mock it, or kind of like, but there's a subtlety there that I'm just starting to really cultivate in myself.
Yeah. I think there is like a, Richard Rohr says you need to have something to push against. And that's usually, where you grew up and that whole culture. For me, it was, a very evangelical, fundamentalist upbringing. And I like drank the Kool-Aid all the way, through my bachelor's degree and everything. And then there is a pushing away of that. And it usually is a pendulum swing to like the opposite place. And then, with the work of going to the interior place and doing shadow work, doing interior work, doing the soul work, it feels like the pendulum, like it stops swinging so hard, but there's still that energy, as you put it. For me, I would label it emotion. When I think of who I used to be, there is still like a disgust that wants to just rise up immediately. It's my knee-jerk emotional reaction. And then if I don't heal that place, then I use that emotional energy against the people who embody who I used to be in the present.
Yeah. Yes.
And then you have other people doing it with what they have pushed off against. And, now you say, there's millions of people with these mutated, perspectives out there. And everyone, Merton says that, we're not at peace with one another because we're not at peace with God. We're not at peace with God because we're not at peace with ourselves. And it's like, I may have gotten that order out of order, but the general thing is we have not gone in and done that work. And so then we project what we hate interior. We don't want to look at it, so we project it outwards and hate it there. And
that's right. And I think too, some of the most profound, important treasures and wisdom that comes through the Christian mystical tradition is it comes through a monastic setting, which in that case and pretty much across the planet came through developed into a celibate male hierarchy. And so even though the extraordinary wisdom is there, it's because it's coming through a stream of disembodiment. What we're failing to recognize is when that emotion comes up of disgust, it's actually something we're carrying in the body. It's actually in our body, actual body.
Yeah.
And so it needs in a trauma informed way, it needs to be touched. It needs help, because you can't think your way out of it. And what comes from a celibate male hierarchy is a whole lot of it came through the mental rational age. So we're always trying to think our way out of this shame, but it's actually in the body. And so I'm interested in bringing in embodiment to touch this mystical strain that came through that monastic tradition, and to bring it more together. I know that it's there, but I do see that as one of the problematic reasons we can't quite get there, even when we go toward a new monasticism, or we're still influenced by such a beautiful tradition, but it has that shadow of disembodiment and a sort of pyramidal male power structure, and so what we're seeing right now is the passing of that age. We're seeing the passing of the mental rational structure. However, I was really influenced a year and a half or 2 years ago by how Cynthia Bourgeau began to work with a fellow. Well, she worked with his material, his tome, Ever Present Origin, Jean Gebser. He's sort of the godfather of spiral dynamics, and the thing that he does that is different from Ken Wilber's work is he looks at the whole picture from a timeless realm, like a timeless perspective. So in other words, the primordial, the magic structure, the mythic structure, the mental structure are all ever present. His book is a massive book. It's called Ever Present Origin. And he looks at it as ever present, as opposed to this idea of transcend and include. The word transcendence, by its very nature, implies a pyramidal. And lots of people, including Richard Rohr, who I love and is one of my great teachers, will say that there's good hierarchies and bad hierarchies. And I agree that there are, depending on how you look at it. But I'm so fascinated with the fact that we're in a passing age, because I think the reason we're seeing the magic structure so present and prevalent, and the mythic structure, the how we're drawn to, how awakened we feel when we hear an old story. And what happens if you spend time with old stories, say from your own heritage, or just old stories from around the world, and what happens then when you go and hear the Abraham Isaac story that is otherwise at a literal level very disturbing. Right, like to hear or the Solomon story with the two women claiming the same baby, like all of these stories start to develop kind of a silver hue that they didn't have before in like the felt story, Sunday school type atmosphere. So that we're in a time where we're in a great turning, like as Joanna Macy calls it. We're in a portal. We're in a birth canal, and all of those structures are we have access to all of them right now, which is why you're seeing like a massive resurgence of people who perhaps grew up in the church, or their parents left the church, and you're seeing like millions upon millions of people opening the magic structure right now, in ways that don't have a lot of roots to them, in ways that are not always, but because I think the reason why some of it doesn't have enough rootedness is because we've lobbed off our own pot-bound roots, or they're naked. They're not in we're trying to put them into soil that we bought, or like, and so that's really I see that as my work moving forward, is to do that for myself. I'm like a pilgrim on this path, and to really explore embodiment practices, and to tap root into the history more than we're doing, because it's really difficult to do that when you've caged, well, for lack of a better word, Jesus. If you've shut yourself, if you've had access in whatever mutated form to a Christic source, or if you've encountered that in any way throughout your life, and then you sever that connection because it's so painful, because of how you experienced it, it's still unless you alchemize that, it gets caged, and it's powerful. It's very, very powerful.
Yeah.
So I'm dealing with that cage in myself, and that's really what my work is about right now.
Okay. You mentioned something just a little while back that like sparked something, and then it was like dominoes fell for me, where you mentioned that like we are in like this birth canal. We're in a great turning, a great upheaval. And like when we release this, we'll be out of Advent, but right now when we're in Advent, yes, and we're looking at like the story of the birth of the Christ that happens through, the feminine wisdom. Men were asked to step aside and stay silent. God speaks to Mary. She says yes. And then there's this working of the feminine wisdom, feminine energies with God to birth something new into the world. And, the men are struck silent. But then you have like this rising up story where Herod says, no, we can't have something new. I will fight back. Yes. And I will oppress and push. And I'm seeing that as like this template for where we are, where something new is being born, but then we have this pushing back. We have some men who are saying it is time to listen, it's time to learn, it's time to be silent, but then we have like this great pushing back, even in church and society, like Herod is fighting the birth of the Christ, of something new, because no, I'm in charge, I have power, and I need to maintain that. Does that spark any imagination for you at all? Like it did me?
For sure it does. It's fear-based.
Yeah.
It's fear-based. It's, I have a story it's not my story. It goes all the way back again to Mesopotamia, and you have it with Europa, but it also has its roots in Gaul, France, and where my great-grandmother, one of my great-grandmothers is from Somerset, England. And I knew, like, I sat on her knee as a child, and I took my kids to the little thatch roof cottage she grew up in, and, and went through the Mendip Hills, and we went to Glastonbury, and I showed them that there is mystery in your history. I keep saying to my kids, they're going to be like in therapy when they're older. My mom kept, anyway. So, but there's a story of, it's the second song on my folk opera, and it's called Maidens of the Wells. And the story is that at one point there were water protectors. And this is in Europe, okay? And they would come, they lived at these well springs. And the wellspring is like this fresh water that's always just fresh, And when travelers would come by weary from their journeys, the women would come out with platters full of food and these vessels with water that would quench your thirst. And at one point, King Amangon comes along with his men, and he rapes one of the water protectors, one of the women, and he carries her off against her will. And the men have this moment where they could, not follow suit with King Amangon, but they end up mimicking him. And they say that it was at that point that the land turned to a wasteland. And it's a story about our relationship with the land and our acquisition and our objectification and, all of this. But in the song, I say, till one day it struck you, you were not in control. There was something in that water you weren't allowed to hold. So you pursued, and you subdued, and it's like trophy hunting, or this mutation that and you could go back and look at where that comes from, what happened, and when you do that, it's not about justifying behavior, but it is about, like, I believe that we have the capacity to actually touch these stories and alchemize them. Like, I believe we have the capacity to, I go into the sauna every morning and I have a practice in there, partly influenced by Tonglen, this practice of breathing in and you have to be very careful how you do that. When you breathe in the misalignment and you breathe out the alignment. And that's why I'm excited at this point in this portal, all the portal, like, as it opens us to trusting that that's actually a thing. Like, that's a magic structure to be able to see that we actually can tend to this planet. And yes, in a corporeal, tangible way, but also in the spirit realm, and how we hold it. Like, right now I can feel the people who cherish the Holy Land and want it to be common ground for everyone. I can feel them on the ground over there, like, holding insurmountable, impossible space. I can feel them. And that is real. Like, it's not a figment of my imagination. And one of the things that the world religions did, as these light bulbs are turning on around the world, through Buddhism, through the Vedas, through that extraordinary time in Babylonian exile with the Judeans, and so on, is that we shut the door on really important wisdom that was carried in how to tend to the village and how to trust in magical things. Trust that that's a part of, the serendipitous reality of this incarnated planet. Yeah. We say it's a web, we say we're connected, we say all these things, but we often say it from here, right? And here is important. That's the other thing, is that it's important, but it isn't all there is. Yeah. And right now we run the risk, because we're in the portal, of superseding the mental age by completely annihilating it. Because that's the energy we've used to supersede every other epoch. Yeah. So I think we're at a time where we're being invited into an integrality that a lot of these seers and teachers that we have held, like Jesus, that's what they were doing, that they were so ahead of their time.
I did some research in my doctorate degree, and we're talking about making everything so cerebral and rational. And we took this word, theologian, and we turned it into, what we would say a scientist is, but we do that with information about God. A theologian is somebody who, can, cut up all of the verses of the Bible and then put them in their proper categories. And I ran across this paper by a Cambridge professor, and he said that the word theologian is not a Christian word. And it was the first time I ever came across that concept. He said that the word theologian has its roots in pagan Roman imperialism, the cult where they worship the Caesars. And the job of the theologian was to take the stories of, their history, their people, and then to put it to song and poem, like they were the lectionaries, basically. And the first time we see the word theologian in a Christian context is not until, I think it was 4th or 5th century, when one of the monks who was transcribing Revelation, he put as a footnote as the author of Revelation was John, the theologian. And that's the very first time he's like, oh, he's doing what those people over there were doing. And so this word that we've made into like a scientist for God is actually more of an artist and a liturgical, someone who's writing poetry and song and doing art. With that understanding, do you see similarities in what you're doing in the expression of your art with, how the roots of this word theologian actually come from?
Well, it definitely resonates. I mean, it's what I'm trying to do. It's what I'm in service to, I guess. It totally resonates. And it resonates that would be the roots of it as well. It makes me think again of the rishis, the hymn writers, some of whom were using plant medicine to intuit a more trustworthy set of gods or God and source. And it makes me think of the bards, makes me think of the extraordinary poetry from Islam. And for myself, I tend toward seeing myself as an aspiring bard. But Father Ron Rolheiser, I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's his most extraordinary work is around holy longing. It's this longing at the heart of all things that's either aligned or misaligned.
Yeah.
And there's so many ways culturally and with customs that we can ritualize that, right? And he called me once a right brain theologian.
I love that.
So I think his intuition on the matter is that it's refreshing to have like artistry dabbling in where they don't belong. Kind of doing a little dance across the page.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Somebody asked me, a couple people have asked me, I said, I'm interviewing Alana Levandoski. Is she a musician? I'm like, well, yeah, but that's not a big enough word. It's and I'm trying to explain like what you do in your art. And I'm like, these words don't work. Just go check out the work, because it's almost like, if you're familiar with iconography, the yes. painting of icons was a liturgical practice. They had colors that meant things, and they had to do it in specific orders and ways. And there are layers of colors and pictures that we're never going to see, but they were a part of the process of making this icon. And it seems as though your artwork does that. You're into iconography, but with music and film and drama, and you're doing
sonicography.
Yeah, that would be good. I like that word. And now you're doing this folk opera, that's just wonderful. You did an entire album dedicated to Thomas Merton, who is kind of I have a t-shirt that says Thomas Merton is my homeboy. Like that's
Yeah.
Someone made it for me because I love his things. What did Merton give you that was so valuable that you decided to put his biography to music?
Well, it started, I left, I was in the music business for about 10 years, like the official entertainment industry, which is, a lot of people might not realize this, but it's like walking into the mouth of the patriarchy, like one of the most mutated forms of the patriarchy. And so I struggled inside of this world. And actually, I was, the night I decided I was leaving, Harvey Weinstein was standing to my right, and I was standing on a Hollywood rooftop, and I was looking at the Hollywood sign, and I felt like I want to be a mother, I want to be a lover, I want to nurture in my life, and I felt like it was the last place maybe on the planet that would be a fertile, place to be able to do that. And so I left very heartbroken. I completely disassembled my global team, and didn't do it very well because I was heartbroken, for lots of reasons. My personal life was falling apart, and I, growing up also exposed to fundamentalism, I was, this was all like this Christic presence was always there, but I was like, afraid to like explore my mystical self, and so I left and I went and ended up kind of hiding out at a Benedictine monastery, and was in rhythm with the sisters. And it was a beautiful experience, but I was down a hall. I was the only one in any of these rooms down this hall, and as the volunteer. And my room was exactly next to their monastic library. There's a library on the retreat center side, and then the monastic library. And I got to spend a lot of time in there. I had total access to being in there. And it was an illuminated time. There weren't illuminated manuscripts officially, some gorgeous old books, but some of these mystics nearly palpably arrived in the room, including Thomas Merton. And a friend of mine gave me a book called The Solace of Fierce Landscapes by Belden Lane. And I was reading that book as I was exposing myself to our mystical stream, and that was how I ended up in the long story of ending up in the inaugural class of the Living School with Richard Rohr and James Finley and Cynthia Bourgeot. At that time, those were the core faculty. So it was like he was nearly palpably one of the ones that, as I was drowning, pulled me out. And so when I did the project with James Finley called Sanctuary, exploring the healing path, he was a novice of Thomas Merton and lived at Gethsemane Monastery in the 60s. And I thought, I think I'm going to do a project working with James Finley's heart-centeredness, to tell Thomas Merton's story in song. And, begin in the giftedness of his childhood and move through to his death and beyond. And I think he is, some people say the way he wrote is dated. I think he's a timeless heart, and always will be for me.
Yeah. When I quote Thomas Merton in public, I tend to unmasculinize the gendering, because he's always talking about man and man, but he's talking about humans. And now that we've moved forward, that's the only thing I'll ever change when I'm reading Thomas Merton is I will change the masculine language to the more inclusive language of human, or men and women, or something along those lines. But he was, for me, I was going through a really vocationally difficult time. I guess it was just every angle difficult time back in the 2012, I think. And I don't even remember how I found him or how I stumbled upon him, but he became like my buoy. I just clinged. There was this book called The Book of Hours, which is a collection of Merton's sayings in liturgical form. So you can keep the hours in a week with all Merton writings, all the Psalms and writings and prayers, and everything is Merton writings. And I read that over and over and over again. My wife and I would sit outside before I had to go to a work that I hated, and it was just suffocating me. And we would just read the Book of Hours for the day and just keep, and it was my buoy. I held on to it, and I think he has a special place in my heart because of that. He got me through that time.
Yes.
So
that's a beautiful book.
Yeah. Yeah. That one and The Inner Experience, that book is my favorite Merton book itself, that he I know it was put together posthumously, but he wrote the majority of it.
Because I know James Finley did the foreword for that book, The Book of Hours.
I don't think I realized that. I've been listening to Finley's things, and then I'd read Merton, and I just opened it up again today. I'm going to have to go and check that out. Yeah.
The one that the book that really guided me through, I basically had a stack, through the whole, everything. And then the idea is, when you're a songwriter, you bring everything through the eye of a needle, and you simplify, and you, strip away so much. But when I do research for a project, it takes me a long time, and I do it quite thoroughly. The guide was, I had all of the books, and then my main guide was called The Intimate Merton. Intimate Merton, and it's a collection of his journals. And so, it's, again, that message is pretty loud and clear, I think, that there's a place in you that belongs entirely to the divine, that nobody can do anything to. And I think that was his very clear message. And I love, I got to have the voice of the Dalai Lama on that project, calling Merton a very strong bridge between the Catholic tradition and the Buddhist tradition, and the voice of Thomas Merton himself. And, I listened again to hours and hours and hours of his teaching to the novices for that project as well. And there's one thing that I go back to quite often when I look at this, how these mutations happen. And I wouldn't even say that the way we see it is a mutation. I would say our inability to go toward in a homeopathic manner is what creates these mutations. When we exile, what is ours to do? I remember Merton saying, I remember him saying to the novices, I know I've been told that, that I focus on this too much, and I probably do. But the war in Vietnam, in my opinion, is America working out its own neurosis. And I remember that not just as a political idea for that time, even though it's true, but as like the way he saw it, like, is more what I like to see, is like he saw it as working out your neurosis, on foreign soil, on making somebody else, work it out for you. And I think we're seeing a lot of that right now, because we don't know how to take the energy of this story of Christendom and dance it through. So,
yeah. Is there a closing encouragement on how one can do that and encourage that to happen around them that you'd like to leave us with?
Well, I'm not like a how-to person, but as someone who is devoted to process, because I'm a songwriter. So as a songwriter, any type of art, you go through a process. You go through a process of unknowing. You go through a process of, well, here's another great Merton quote. He said, and he was speaking about art, actually. He said, the trouble, we all want the Red Sea to part, but the trouble is that it won't part until you're in over your head. And so, again, I work with, these are a part of the fabric of who I am now, these saying is, and that's, I know that to be true, that there hasn't been one song to come out of me when I had like full faculty control and like reins, like I had to be pummeled down underneath into this process. And it's the thing that we're afraid of, but it's a thing that we have to find tools for. And tools is not even an apt word. It's like movements. It's like collage. It's like, various things that help us to have what would the word be? It's like we need to develop a thicker skin to get toward it, instead of just the trauma that we're all in. And because it's in the body, we get this fight, flight, freeze constantly. And so whenever that happens, it's trauma, it's in the body. And so, but we're also living in a time where tools for regulating your nervous system is, the research is alive and well and extraordinary. And so I would say, like, movement and be open to process, and unknowing, because that's something I think that I was afraid to let go of, even as I was letting go of my knowing. I was like, I'm going to know that I'm letting go of my knowing, like it's just that, like, that conditioning of that. And I think it is based in our fight, flight, freeze cycles that we're in. So.
Well, that is good. And that is beautiful. Thank you so much for just sharing your wisdom, your story, your journey, your perspectives with us. How can people connect with what you're doing now? What's the best way to connect with you?
Well, come find me on Instagram. And my website is currently coming soon. It's in coming soon mode, because I have a lot to unveil. I'm very excited about what's going on behind the page right now. It won't be unveiled until the new year, but I have, you can just go to alanalevandoski.com, and there's just a place where you can sign up to a waiting list to find out what's coming. And then you can connect with me on Instagram. I'm also on Facebook. I find I like working on Instagram just as if I have to be on social media, I like that modality a little bit more, but I have a lot of people over on Facebook, so I'm there, as well. So
All right, I will check you out. I'm currently following you on Facebook because I feel like an old man when I get on Instagram and I'm like, I can't figure this out. I'm learning. I'm trying to learn, but that one's harder for me. But I'll do that. And by the time this does come out, it sounds like your website will be live, because this will be first Wednesday of the new year. So,
well, it probably won't be live yet.
Okay,
then.
We'll be close then.
Yeah, it's like we're drum rolling right now.
Drum rolling. All right. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming and sharing with us. This has been just a wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for listening to the Liminal Living podcast today. I hope you have enjoyed this conversation. I know that I did. I learned quite a bit, and I'm excited for you to check out Alana's artwork on her web pages, and everything will be in the show notes for you to definitely go and check things out. You're going to want to listen to her albums. The Thomas Merton album was wonderful for me, being a Thomas Merton fan, but there is so many flavors of music that you can go and check out from her entire career. And so I would love to wish you the best for this week. Keep walking in those liminal spaces. Don't try to escape. Just embody yourself in the present moment, and you will be fine, my friends. And I'll see you next week. Peace out.